Chapter 6, Vanity Fair.
It was Evangelist. The pilgrims welcomed him, and he responded, "I am very glad to find you still pursuing the right road, but I must warn you of the dangers ahead. In the next town called Folly, you will be surrounded by enemies, and one of you will die. Beware, particularly of the town's great attraction, Vanity Fair, which Prince Beelzebub and his companions set up many years ago with the intention of enticing pilgrims from the right way. In that fair, wealth and fame, pleasure and position, and many other follies are for sale. Once, long ago, the Prince of Princes passed through Folly, but he spent no time or money on its shoddy wares. I'm on a highway to hell. Welcome to the Hotel California. Such a love affair. Having said goodbye to Evangelist, Christian and Faithful proceeded into Folly Town, and so into Vanity Fair. Here the pilgrim's strange dress and speech soon began to attract laughter and comment from the townsfolk. Christian and Faithful kept walking as long as they could, but when a jeering mob surrounded them, they were forced to stop. They bore in silence the crowd's mockery and insults and offered no resistance when they were seized and dragged along the streets into court to be questioned by the magistrates. Here they were asked where they were going, where they came from, and why they were dressed so strangely. To which Christian and Faithful responded courteously, "We are pilgrims on our way to the heavenly city, and have done nothing to cause this trouble." But the magistrates had already made up their minds that the pilgrims were mad, so they proceeded to beat them and smear them with dirt. Then they pushed them into a cage to become the butt of staring eyes, pointing fingers, and taunting voices. Christian and Faithful bore all this patiently, answering their tormentors gently and courteously. Some of the onlookers were softened by their behaviour and tried to restrain their fellow townsfolk, but only succeeded in angering them more. Tempers flared, and a scuffle broke out between the moderate and the violent groups. As a result, Christian and Faithful were taken to the magistrates for a second trial, at which they were made scapegoats for the disturbance. Their punishment was prolonged and severe. First they were beaten, then clamped in irons and chained, and finally led up and down the streets as a deterrent to others. But through it all, Christian and Faithful showed such meekness and patience that, as before, some bystanders were won over. However, this so angered the rest that they resolved to bring about the pilgrims' deaths. In the meantime, they returned Christian and Faithful to the cage, making their feet fast in the stocks. Inside their humiliating prison, the bruised and battered pilgrims comforted each other, remembering Evangelist's words, and then committed their future to God. Later, the prisoners were released from the cage to be taken to their third trial. The presiding judge was Lord Hategood, and he was assisted by 12 jurymen, whose names were these: Blind Man, No Good, Malice, Love Lust, Live Loose, Heady, High Mind, Enmity, Liar, Cruelty, Hate Light, and implacable. Christian and Faithful stood before the judge and were charged with being enemies and peace breakers. It was Faithful who spoke up in defense of his companion and himself. "We only reject whatever is in opposition to the Prince of Princes," he said, adding, "My quarrel is with the Prince of Darkness. I defy him and all his angels." Next, the three witnesses were called upon to state their accusations. First, Envy stepped forward and swore to tell the truth. He denounced Faithful with the words, "That vile man says our views are opposed to Christianity." Next, Superstition took the oath and added to his denunciation of Christian's companion, "He says our religion is worthless because we cannot please God by it, and that must imply that we are all condemned." Finally, mealy-mouthed Pickthank was sworn in. "The prisoner," he said, indicating Faithful, "speaks scornfully of our prince and also of you, my Lord Judge." Faithful then asked for a chance to reply, and Lord Hategood reluctantly agreed. To his first accuser, the pilgrim said, "All laws and customs that are contrary to God's word are contrary to the Christian faith." To his second he said, "No worship can please God unless the faith of the worshippers is rooted in God's revealed will." And to his third, "The prince of whom you speak and all his henchmen are more fit for hell than for this town." Then the judge addressed the jury at length, concluding with, "History is on my side. I condemn this man to death." This sentence was unanimously and speedily endorsed by the jury. Faithful was taken from the courtroom to be beaten and punched, stoned and mocked, cut with knives and pricked with sword points. Finally, they tied him to the wooden stake and burnt him, as they thought, to death. They did not see, behind their backs, the chariot and horses which swept courageous Faithful up through the clouds to heaven itself as trumpets sounded. Christian was returned to prison, but after a time, with God's help, he escaped. He then continued with his journey, rejoicing in the knowledge that his former companion had passed beyond all torment and was tasting the joys of heaven, for which he also longed. Weak in body, but strong in hope, Christian travelled onwards, singing about the pilgrim who had been faithful even to death.